For 25 years, one company has controlled how the world finds information. Not controlled in the way that big companies usually control things, through pricing or marketing or brand loyalty. Controlled in the way that changes behavior. When something confusing happens, people don't say, "Let me look that up." They say, "Let me Google it." That is not just market dominance. That is cultural ownership of an entire human behavior. And now, for the first time in a generation, something is threatening it. Not a rival search engine. Not a government regulator. Not a startup with a better algorithm. An entirely different way of finding answers. Here is what makes this story strange. Google saw it coming. Google actually helped build the technology that is now challenging them. And yet, when the moment arrived, they hesitated. And that hesitation may turn out to be one of the most consequential decisions in the history of the internet. This is the story of how Google built the most valuable monopoly in technology history, why artificial intelligence is the first real threat it has ever faced, and what the answer to that question actually looks like right now. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what Google actually built. Larry Page and Sergey Brin were PhD students at Stanford in the late 1990s when they started working on a search engine with a different idea at its core. Most search engines at the time ranked pages based on how many times a keyword appeared. Page and Brin looked at how academic papers cited each other and asked a different question. What if the importance of a web page could be measured by how many other pages linked to it? They called it PageRank, and it worked better than anything else at the time. Google launched publicly in 1998. Within a few years, it had become the dominant way people navigated the internet. By the mid-2000s, it was not just winning, it was the category. But here is the part that most people miss about Google's dominance. Search was not the product. Advertising was the product. When you type a query into Google, what you are actually doing is telling Google something extremely valuable, exactly what you want right now in this moment. No other advertising platform in history had access to that kind of signal. Television ads interrupt people who may or may not be interested. Google ads appear at the precise moment someone is actively looking for something. That insight built one of the most profitable businesses ever created. Google's parent company, Alphabet, generates the vast majority of its revenue from search advertising. The numbers involved are not small. They're industry-defining. And for 2 decades, nobody came close to threatening it. Microsoft tried with Bing. It gained some share but never cracked the habit. Every other search engine that emerged was measured against Google and found lacking. The network effects were too strong, the brand too embedded, the data advantage too large. Governments started paying attention. In the United States, a major antitrust case found that Google had illegally maintained its monopoly in search through exclusive agreements, paying companies like Apple enormous sums to be the default search engine on their devices. The court found that these deals helped lock users into Google before they ever had a chance to choose something else. Even with the legal pressure, nobody in the industry believed that Google's core search business faced a genuine existential threat. Then came November 2022. OpenAI released ChatGPT to the public. Within 2 months, it had reached more users faster than any consumer application in history. And people started doing something that seemed small at first, but was actually significant. They started asking ChatGPT questions they would previously have Googled. Not all questions, not even most questions, but enough to notice. The difference in experience was real. When you search Google for a complex question, you get a list of links. You then have to click those links, read through pages, and synthesize the answer yourself. When you ask ChatGPT the same question, you get a direct answer in plain language, synthesized, organized, ready to use. For certain kinds of questions, that experience was simply better. The word that started appearing in industry conversations was search behavior. Were people changing how they searched? Were they going to AI tools first and Google second? Or were they using both for different things? The data was early and incomplete, but the direction was clear enough to make Google nervous. Google issued what became known internally as a code red. Senior executives recognized that the rise of conversational AI represented the first genuine threat to their core business in 2 decades. And here is the painful irony. Google had been one of the leading organizations in the development of the very technology that was now threatening them. In 2017, researchers at Google published a paper called Attention is All You Need. It introduced the transformer architecture, the technical foundation that made modern large language models, including ChatGPT, possible. Google had the research. Google had the talent. Google had the resources. They had even built their own conversational AI systems internally, but they had not released them publicly. The reason was not incompetence. It was caution, and a very specific kind of caution. Google's entire business depended on people clicking on search results and seeing ads. A system that gave direct answers instead of lists of links did not fit neatly into that model. If users got their answer directly from an AI, they would not click on links. If they did not click on links, they would not see ads. If they did not see ads, Google's revenue would decline. The technology existed inside Google. The hesitation was about the business model. OpenAI did not have that constraint. They had no search advertising business to protect. They could release a conversational AI product without worrying about what it would do to their existing revenue. That asymmetry changed everything. Google's response came quickly. They accelerated the launch of their own AI product, initially called Bard and later rebranded as Gemini. They began integrating AI-generated summaries directly into search results, a feature called AI Overviews, which placed a synthesized answer at the top of the page before any links appeared. The rollout was not smooth. Early versions of AI Overviews produced responses that were incorrect in ways that ranged from embarrassing to genuinely dangerous. Screenshots spread rapidly online showing the system giving advice that no reasonable person would follow. Google moved quickly to address the problems, but the damage to perception was real. More importantly, the feature itself created a new tension inside Google's business. If AI Overviews successfully answer users' questions at the top of the page, users have less reason to scroll down to the links, including the sponsored links that generate revenue. Google was essentially competing with its own advertising business in an attempt to stay relevant. Meanwhile, Microsoft had moved faster. Microsoft invested heavily in OpenAI and integrated the technology directly into Bing, its search engine. For a brief period, Bing received more attention than it had in years. Tech journalists wrote seriously about whether Microsoft had found the weapon it needed to finally challenge Google. It did not displace Google, not remotely, but it demonstrated something important: that the combination of search and conversational AI was viable and that users would engage with it. New competitors emerged. Perplexity AI built a search experience designed around AI-generated answers with citations. It grew faster than almost any search startup in recent memory, though its absolute numbers remained small compared to Google's scale. The picture that emerged was not one of Google being immediately defeated. It was something more complicated and more interesting. Google still handled the vast majority of the world's searches. The habit was deeply embedded. 4 quick lookups, a weather forecast, a phone number, a sports score. Google remained the fastest and most familiar option. But for complex questions, research tasks, and situations where someone needed to understand something rather than just find it, AI tools were increasingly the first stop. A student writing a paper, a professional researching an industry, a developer trying to understand an error message. These users were building new habits that did not start with a Google search. The question was whether those habits would remain parallel to Google or eventually replace it. Analysts who study search behavior began tracking something they called zero-click searches, queries where users got enough of an answer from the results page itself that they never clicked through to a website. AI tools were accelerating a version of this, but taking it further. Users were not just avoiding clicking through to websites, they were avoiding Google entirely for certain tasks. The legal picture added another layer of pressure. The antitrust ruling in the United States found that Google had used its financial power to maintain its position, paying to be the default rather than winning by being significantly better. That ruling opened the door to potential remedies that could change how Google distributes its search engine, which could in turn affect the traffic and data advantages that have sustained its dominance. None of these pressures, on their own, were enough to end Google's monopoly quickly. But together, they formed something that had never existed before, a credible multi-front challenge to a business that had operated without serious competition for most of its existence. Google was not losing, but for the first time it was fighting. The deeper story here is not really about search engines. It is about what happens when a company builds something so dominant that protecting it becomes more important than improving it. Google had the research to build what OpenAI built. They made a rational decision not to release it, because releasing it would have threatened their existing business. That rational decision opened a window, and a competitor walked through it. The same pattern appears throughout business history. The companies that define a category often struggle to disrupt themselves, because disruption means destroying the thing that made them successful. It is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of incentives. Google built the most valuable advertising business in history by owning how people found information. Artificial intelligence is now offering a different way to find information, one that Google helped invent, but was slow to deploy. Whether that amounts to the end of Google's monopoly, the transformation of it, or simply a new chapter in a story that Google eventually navigates successfully, nobody can say with certainty right now. What is certain is this: the thing that felt permanent, the assumption that search meant Google, is no longer permanent. And in markets, the moment an assumption stops being permanent is usually when the most interesting things begin to happen. So here is the question worth sitting with. Google delayed releasing its own AI because it was afraid of what it would do to its existing business. In the end, that delay may have done more damage than the technology itself would have. In your own work, is there something you already know how to do, but haven't done yet because you're worried about what it will cost you? Sometimes the thing you're protecting is the thing that's holding you back. If stories like this one are what you're looking for, Ledger and Logic has more of them.